Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we'll be looking at biological molecules. When we are talking about biological molecules, we are referring to molecules that were made by cells or that were made by living organisms. So let us begin. In this lecture, these are the things that we will be looking at. We will be looking at macronutrients. The macronutrients include carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Then we will be looking at micronutrients. The micronutrients here refer to the minerals and the vitamins. We will also be looking at balanced diet and nutrient deficiency. Macronutrients. The prefix macro means large. So macronutrients are really the nutrients that are needed in large amount or large quantity. And these three nutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. We will briefly look at each one of those macromolecules. And the first of those macronutrients that we will be looking at would be carbohydrate. The simplest form of our carbohydrates, we call that monosaccharide. Generally, the structure of carbohydrates, the chemical structure is made up of carbon, we have hydrogen, and we have oxygen. Monosaccharide means single unit, a single unit of sugar, and we refer to them as simple sugars. Mono means one, and the saccharide, which is the root word where saccharide comes from, means sweet. So the simplest form of sugar, or the single unit of the sugar, is glucose. We have fructose, and we have galactose. So on the diagram on the right, as you can see, we have the three structures of the different forms of monosaccharides. The difference between the three of them is really the arrangement of the atom, because the chemical formula for each one of these monosaccharides is the same. The chemical formula being C6H12O6. All of them have the same chemical formula, but structurally they're different. Next we have disaccharide. The disaccharides, these are made up of two simple sugars joining together, and when they join together they form a complex sugar. Two examples of disaccharides are sucrose and maltose. The animation on the right here is giving us an idea how this process occurs. It's through a dehydration synthesis. So we have two simple sugar, and each one of them loses an atom. One of them loses a hydrogen, one of them loses an OH group, which forms water. So this forms here a water, and when they lose this OH and the H group, it causes the two monosaccharides to join together. Because this is not an advanced level course, we will not get into more details than this. So disaccharides, they are usually soluble in water, and the monosaccharides, they are also very soluble in water. And just like the monosaccharide, the disaccharides are also sweet in taste. Next, we have the polysaccharides. These are simple sugars that are joined together and they form long chains together. There might be a few sugars that are joined together, or it could be very long chains, and these chains can be thousands of simple sugars joining together. Examples of polysaccharides include cellulose, and the cellulose is found on cell wall of plants. So the structure of the cell wall consists of cellulose, which is a form of carbohydrates. We also have starch, which is a polysaccharide, and starch is found in plants. Starch is a storage molecule in plants. So when excess glucose is made during photosynthesis in plants, the plants will store the excess glucose as starch. We also have glycogen as an example of polysaccharide. Glycogen is the excess glucose that is stored in animals. For example, in our liver and in our muscle cells, the glucose is stored as glycogen. So these are all examples of polysaccharides. The animation here is showing us how they are joined together. The different monosaccharide units are joined together to form polysaccharides. Most of the polysaccharides, they are insoluble, meaning that they cannot dissolve in water. So if you add starch to water, you would find that the starch will not dissolve in water. And they do not have a sweet taste. So they have two main functions. They store energy. For example, the starch, it stores energy for the plant. So when the plant needs that energy later on, the starch will break down into monosaccharides, and it will be used for respiration. Similarly, in humans, we store our glycogen, and that glycogen will break down into glucose when we need that energy. And the polysaccharides also form structures in living organisms. For example, the cellulose form the cell wall that is found in plants. Some additional information here regarding carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are generally used to provide energy, and 1 gram of carbohydrates, if we consume 1 gram of the carbohydrate, it gives us 17 kilojoules of energy. As mentioned before, they form the structure of cell wall. Another polysaccharide is called chitin, and this forms the exoskeleton of insects. So these are very strong structures that are found in nature. The next macronutrient that we will look at now would be proteins. Proteins are organic compounds which are made up of small molecules called amino acids. So the smallest unit of the carbohydrate, we call that the monosaccharide. Example of monosaccharide was glucose. Similarly, in proteins, the simplest structure, we call that amino acids. And on the right-hand side, we have a typical structure of an amino acid. Wherever you see the R is located, that's where different atoms are attached, and this will determine what type of amino acid this would be. There are 20 different types of amino acid. So it depends on the molecules, it depends on the atoms that are now attached to the R here, and that will determine the type of amino acid that we have. Some proteins are soluble. Examples of proteins that are soluble is hemoglobin. You should know why it is important for some proteins to be soluble. The hemoglobin, for example, transports oxygen. Some proteins are also insoluble. For example, keratin. And keratin is the protein that is found in our hair structure. In terms of the chemical structure, as you could also see on the diagram here, the atoms that protein consists of are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Some proteins also have sulfur. Long chains of proteins or long chains of amino acids, when the amino acids, which are the single unit, when they're joined together and form long chains, we call that polypeptide. Poly meaning many. So there are several different functions that protein have as compared to carbohydrates, and we will briefly look at some of the functions here. So one function here is that they assist in digestion. Examples of proteins that assist in digestion, we have the enzymes, the amylase, lipase, pepsin, and trypsin. These are enzymes, and enzymes are made of proteins. Then there are some proteins that help in transporting useful substances. For example, we have hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is important to transport oxygen in our body. The oxygen binds to the hemoglobin, and the oxygen is then transported to different parts of our body. Proteins also help in formation of our structure. For example, we have actin, we have tubulin, we have keratin, and these are all important for the structure of living organisms. Hormones are also made using proteins. For example, insulin and thyroxine. Proteins are also important in defending our body against pathogens. Proteins are important in movement. For example, we have actin and myosin. These are structures that are made using protein. And in some cases, the protein is used as storage. Next in the list of macronutrients, we have lipids. Lipids are organic compounds, meaning they are derived from living sources, and they include fats and oils. What is the difference between fats and oils? Fats are solids at room temperature, whereas oil, these are in liquid form at room temperature. So the chemical structure or the atoms that the lipids consist of would be carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Lipids are generally insoluble in water, and they are made up of 4 molecules that are joined together. The 4 molecules are shown in a diagram here. We have 3 molecules of fatty acid. So we have 1 fatty acid, 2 fatty acids, 3 fatty acids, and then we have the glycerol. Function of fats or functions of lipids. They can be used to release energy. 1 gram, if you consume 1 gram of fat, then it will provide 39 kilojoules of energy. And if you recall, for carbohydrates, if you consume 1 gram, it will provide 17 kilojoules of energy. The fats produce double or a little more than double the amount of energy that 1 gram of carbohydrate will provide. Some additional functions of lipids would be that they're used to make hormones, they're used to make cell membrane. As shown in the diagram here, the cell membrane is made using lipids. And fats also help to absorb vitamins. There are some vitamins that are fat soluble, so these fat soluble vitamins will be absorbed by the fats. Fats also help to insulate the body in different animals. This table is showing us the sources of the different macronutrients. So there are different sources that we can get carbohydrates from. These will include bread, potato, we have rice, yams, arrows. Sources of protein include meat, fish, eggs, milk, cheese. Your dairy products have a high source of proteins, and there are also the leguminous plants have a high amount of proteins. Fats, we can get fats from butter, oil, peanuts, avocado, and fat from the meat sources.